In 2021, the Houston Rockets decided to depart from franchise legend James Harden, and it hit the franchise really hard. But they made the decision to hit the rebuild button for once and for all, and for a little while, it was a disaster. They were one of the worst teams in the league, one of the worst teams to just watch in general. But you could see over time that the pieces were being put in place, and last season was the first season that they showed major strides. In the prior offseason, they had made some nice veteran signings that could also impact winning, like signing Fred VanVleet to run the point, signing Dillon Brooks to bring some toughness and some veteran leadership, and signing Jeff Green, a guy who had just come off a championship with the Nuggets that previous season, and also just years and years of experience. Bringing in those guys while also bringing in former Eastern Conference winning coach Ime Udoka really set the tone for what this franchise was going to become. And these moves combining with the development of their young talent led them to a 500 season last season. Had them firmly in the play-in race up until like the final weeks of the season. And now we fast forward to the start of this season and the Rockets are sitting at 9-4, and I am a firm believer in them being somewhere in the top 6 by the end of the season. They carried that momentum over from last season, which kind of feels pretty similar to like when the Detroit Lions in the NFL missed the playoffs versus the Packers in like the last week of the season a couple years ago, and then they carried over that momentum and they built on it. I think the Rockets are kind of in a similar situation, and they're really close to making some real noise in the Western Conference, which obviously we all know that that conference is loaded with talent. So for the Rockets to be in this conversation, they got to be doing something right. And one thing that they've been doing right is defense. Defense. The Houston Rockets have kept that elite defensive identity from last season, and in my opinion, have some of the best defensive personnel in the league. Long defenders, athletic defenders like Amen Thompson, Tari Eason, Dillon Brooks, Jabari Smith Jr., you name it, they got it. They're also one of the most physical teams in the entire league. And when you put it all together, it ranks them out to be a top 3 defense in the league, and the eye test and the stats both back that up. I mean, I think it's not even a debate. The Houston Rockets are elite on that end of the floor. The crazy thing about the Houston Rockets is despite the 9-4 record, they are a middle of the pack to slightly below average offensive team. And when you look at their starting 5, all of them have horrible efficiency. These are guys that are getting the chunk of the minutes. Luckily for them, they have an elite offensive rebounding team ranking first in the league in that department, and this is with new addition Steven Adams only playing about 6 games. My concern would be the track record of 3 of their starters in VanVleet, Green, and Dillon Brooks, because they've usually all been poor efficiency scorers. I expect Jabari Smith and Alperen Sengun to elevate their efficiency, with Jabari Smith basically shooting 30% from 3, where last season he shot 36% on similar volume. And Alperen Sengun shooting 46% as a whole. I think obviously those things will get bumped up. I think when you look at this Rockets team, there are a few things that I'd want to see more of. One of which would be more Reed Sheppard minutes. I know he might not be able to impact the game the way that he fully can right now, with him being a rookie and just working his way into things. But I feel like he'd elevate them a little more offensively. They could use that spacing right now. And they could also use just a good shooter on the floor. One that could be efficient. I mean, I know his efficiency isn't great, but I think if you gave him more playing time, more reps, I think it'd even out and he'd be where he usually is at. You look at his college career, you look at where he's been in high school. The man can shoot the ball. I think if you gave him the reps and the opportunity, you'd see he can do that, and it'd help this team a lot. Also, I'd like to eventually see Amen Thompson become a starter. Specifically as a guard. I think it would unlock him on offense, and I think it'd make this team just overall a little bit better, a little more of a higher ceiling than they do have with Fred VanVleet. And lastly, I think, is the elephant in the room, and that is the Jalen Green situation. Because I feel like he's a polarizing topic for this team. It has to be figured out. Either he has to become a more efficient player like he did in that final stretch of last season where he almost carried them to a playoff spot or a play-in spot, or he stays kind of in the same lane like he has for his entire career, which is like an inefficient scorer that gets his usage but really isn't worth that kind of usage. I think he has the potential to swing the Rockets' fortunes even further in the right direction. But there is the possibility that he can also hold them back. You look at RJ Barrett when he was in New York, he had those similar kind of problems. He'd show you flashes, but for the most part, he was an inefficient scorer, and that's what he was. And they moved off from him for OG Anunoby, and New York got better. I think Houston is in a kind of similar spot where you might have to make that decision real soon, because you can't just stay with him, and if he continues to produce at this kind of level, expect better. I think it just is who he is if he can't improve. But as a whole, I think the Houston Rockets have rebuilt this team in a fast and just great way. I think the front office has done a great job using their free agency money, using their draft picks, the draft capital that they had. I think they've done a really good job. And I think the Western Conference is going to have to take real notice of this team, because they're about to become a legitimate contender real soon. And not just the Western Conference, but in the entire NBA.